Evening all, welcome to Dust. Right, unlike the last video, which if you didn't see, go watch it because it's a fantastic story that I tell. Unlike that video, we're actually going to talk about the effing game in this one, and the visuals are not terribly interesting, so that gives us a good reason to have a bit of a chat. I don't know why I started bomb trucking, because that happened, but hey, oh well, that's the way it goes. I thought we'd have a bit of a chit chat about Dust, and I think today we're going to talk about tanks and turrets and that kind of thing, because what's interesting to me, and as I kind of play this game and as I stroke my rather impressive neckbeard, I'm kind of surprised how certain things like tanks, I think, have always been sort of kind of done quite well in this game. I think, in fact, tanks are done very well in this game. And I'm going to kind of tackle this from 3 or 4 different angles. The first one is longevity. Now, when you call a tank into planet side, for example, the reality is your tank is probably not going to last longer than 5 to 10 minutes, maybe, probably a lot less, because they're very disposable. They're kind of designed to be, I guess, throwaway. Now, if you're in an outfit, obviously that's different. I'm just citing a very isolated standard kind of way of doing this, and I think to me that's always been an interesting scenario, if you like, of why the Dust tanks feel very good. Now in Dust you can call a tank in and lose it within 10 seconds or 30 seconds or whatever, because you're an idiot and you call the tank in the middle of a red gang, or you call the tank in at a completely pointless arbitrary moment. So you never can be entirely safe when you call in these things. But the purpose, I think, of why Dust is quite good is that the skill of the tanker and the use of the modules is what makes them good. So if you combine modules, a good fit, and you combine a good player who knows what they're doing, you have a very effective platform. Now again, you can do exactly the same in PlanetSide, so you can have a very good tank and a very good pilot and blah 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 blah. But I think the reality is that there's something more kind of solid and powerful in Dust with their tanks, and I can't really kind of explain it more than that, but I think it's just this kind of opinion that Dust tanks have always been very good, powerful things, even when they made the tanks completely throwaway, disposable kind of things. The reality was they were still incredibly fun vehicles to get behind and do stuff with. A prime example here, look at this. We just killed a guy who called a tank in for some reason in the middle of our red line, or rather our front line, so I'm hacking it and I'm about to joyride it. So this is just a good example of, I think, something that's really quite cool, because again, this is the desire behind this game, I think, is to make all areas of the game more interesting than maybe they are currently. And they'll explain that, because I think really the reality is a lot of players would just be quite happy if Dust was without vehicles rather. It was just a massive Counter-Strike gun game comparator, which I think is the wrong way to think of it, because actually the vehicles in this game make the game more than what it is. I think the game would have died long ago if it hadn't have been for vehicles, because vehicles are the link to Eve, as I've said many times, and I think also they just make the game more interesting generally than just a general shooter like Counter-Strike. I think that's something that really is key to the game. My further sort of kind of challenge, or rather I guess supporting action on that, is that tanks in this game have a weight to them, they have a strength to them, and the fact that you have to pay real money for them is actually a real fascinating component of actually their use, because people don't spam them unless they're rich, and you don't find many of them. So the reality is that calling a tank in, even now, is still quite an asset rich thing to do. So that's kind of the supporting thing, saying tanks are brilliant. Let me maybe cover some of the things that aren't so good. I think the biggest issue in this game currently is there just was never enough AV. There was never enough guns for the tanks. There was never enough things to fit on the tanks. The reality is that most tanks all are the same. So all of the shield tanks run a shield fit. You can't run a sneaky armor fit very easily. You can, but not really. And I think, patch on patch, they're making it so that it's actually very difficult to run a tank any other way than you're kind of meant to. Do you know what I mean? And that's very unlike CCP and their approach to these things. CCP generally don't like doing that. They want to force, or rather they want to remove the barriers of the game. So making that was maybe a bad move. I would love to have seen more tanks as well. The Minmatar and the Amar tank are deeply missed, as well as their components for weaponry. The artillery round turret would have been amazing, and as well as the beam and pulse turrets, large turrets, they would have just been astonishingly fun. So I think not having those in was always, again, a very, very bad thing that CCP did. They should have just done that. I'm sure there's many reasons why they didn't. I'm sure there's many reasons why they couldn't. But either way, I think that has been a detractor for vehicles for quite some time. I also would have included the medium assault vehicle as well. It's really questionable what on earth it would have done. Yes, it would have probably been a redundant vehicle from the get-go, but at least by having it in the game is better than not. You know what I mean? By not having it in the game, there's never going to be a role for it. But by including it and then finding a role for it would have been better. These are all moot points, because the reality is that there's probably not going to be any more development on Dust unless there's an extraordinary reason to do so. And I think that I'm happy with that. I think if the game was like this until the day it switched off, fair enough. It's a good game. It's fun. It's challenging. It's a light touch, but I think there's not much more you can say or do about that. I think the reality is that this is an enjoyable game for me, and I think I can only ever speak for me. If you enjoy this game, then there's obviously a reason why you enjoy the game. I think I would love to have seen a little bit more of the depth of the story. I would love to have seen maybe a couple more things, but I think the reality is that that's not going to happen at all now. So back to tanks. I think the tanks were something that I think just really, for me, were seen initially as just completely out of scope, not possible to drive them, not very good, very expensive, kind of, I can't use them. Things, and I never really even bothered with them for quite some time, in fact. Whereas now I see myself as a jack of all trades, and if I want to get in a tank, I'll get in a tank, and that's actually quite a nice feeling, that liberation of getting in a tank. You feel powerful. You feel as if if you pilot this right, you're going to do some damage here. The same with the dropship as well. I think that has always been a very well-designed vehicle for this game. I really do think that they could have made more of the whole vehicle element here. For some reason, I always actually thought that the game was going to be more based around the MCC's deploy. You start on the MCC, but you don't drop from it. You can if you wish, but you don't drop from it. You have the option to load into a dropship and fly towards the objectives. Now, this was always based upon the fact that the maps were going to be bigger. They were going to be much bigger, in fact. And there weren't really drop pads. Drop pads, even back in the day, were quite rare because they were always incredibly high skill point requirements, and plus they took a lot to fit as well. So I think people generally didn't fit them because there was such a penalty to running them, that I think that was why you never saw them so much. Whereas now, if you play against the French or some of those kind of dudes, they will drop 50 plus spawn pads in the match. So many so it's not even worth trying to kill them all. And that's how they win, because they can respawn at exactly where they need to be, right next to their gang to stomp your face in. And I think they've just become the first step of a very broken component of the game that I would like to have seen how the game would have worked without. I would love to have removed them entirely and see how mercs survive. But then again, the further issue is there's nothing worse than not being able to spawn near the front and having to run. So I get it, don't worry, I understand there was no easy way to do that, but I just think there could have been better ways to do it. And maybe the one I thought of was limiting the number of spawn pads in the round, but again, that's open for abuse, because a blue team member could just drop all 10 at the back of the base and then screw the team entirely. So there really is no easy fix for this, and I'm not even looking for a fix to this. I think I'm just more looking at a missed opportunity to make the game more tactical, like PlanetSide 2. I was about to say Space Marine then for some reason, but anyway. And I think that's a shame, because the reality is they could have done more. Maybe, just maybe, the MAV was actually designed to be a clone vehicle. Maybe that was actually what it's supposed to be, like the Sunderer in PlanetSide 2. So you do limit the number of spawn pads, but then you have the medium assault vehicle, which is actually designed to be deployed exactly like a Sunderer with turrets, etc. That could have become a mobile spawn base that you have to assault with AV equipment to actually take down. I like that idea. I think that would have been an amazing amount of fun indeed. Again, it just feels that maybe that was another missed opportunity to increase a bit more depth to this. And that's really the key thing, is that people react to depth. Depth in games is what keeps them coming back. And that could be depth, so the complexity of Eve and the various millions of things you can do in it, the millions of components that mix together and then make product that then mix together again. That level of complexity is what keeps that game going. And I think people who play Dust are not stupid. They play the game because they've got keen minds. And I think that level of complexity would have actually been quite interesting to a lot of people. But there we go. Anyway, there we go. Next time we'll carry on this conversation. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about the infantry fits. Hope you enjoyed that. See you next time.